In a workshop filled with the comforting aroma of sawdust and linseed oil, young Emiliano learned the art of carpentry from his beloved grandfather, Octavio. Each day spent crafting and hearing stories of his late mother forged a deep bond between them, making Octavio's love a warm, steady presence in Emiliano's life. As Octavio's health deteriorated, Emiliano stepped up, taking care of the workshop and cherishing every moment with his grandfather, who passed away, leaving Emiliano with a profound sense of loss. Soon after, Emiliano moved in with his estranged father, Salvador, and his new stepmother, Elena. The initial hope for a fresh start quickly gave way to a harsh reality. Elena's true colors emerged, revealing a strict, unkind demeanor towards Emiliano that starkly contrasted with her initial warmth. The young boy found himself isolated and overwhelmed, longing for the comforting familiarity of his grandfather's workshop and the caring presence of Donna Lupe, his neighbor and friend. As Emiliano struggled to adapt to his new life, his father's disbelief in his complaints about Elena only deepened his sense of abandonment. Feeling trapped and unsupported, Emiliano's dreams of a harmonious family life seemed increasingly out of reach. Witness the heart-wrenching transition from a cherished childhood to a stark, unwelcoming reality in this moving story. If you are not subscribed, I recommend you subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss any videos. Before boarding his flight, the son expressed his frustrations about his stepmother to his father, laying bare his grievances and dissatisfaction. In response to these complaints, the father made the drastic decision to install a concealed camera within the house. The footage captured by the hidden lens revealed a series of distressing and shocking scenes, leaving him utterly appalled and deeply troubled by what he had witnessed. In the dimly lit workshop, enveloped in the rich, earthy aroma of sawdust and linseed oil, young Emiliano watched with rapt attention as his grandfather, Octavio, deftly maneuvered through his craft. Observe Emiliano. Each incision should be as deliberate and meaningful as if you were narrating a tale, Octavio instructed, his voice brimming with wisdom and love, eyes sparkling beneath the age-worn lines etched into his face. This workshop, nestled in the heart of Guanajuato, was a sanctuary of creativity and knowledge, far removed from the chaotic turbulence of the outside world. Emiliano, his heart and mind fully engaged, mirrored his grandfather's every motion with a gravity that belied his tender age of 12. "I'll do my best, Grandpa. I want it to be flawless," he vowed, his hands quivering ever so slightly as he guided the saw with unwavering determination. This fervent desire to learn had been kindled by Octavio's nurturing spirit since Emiliano's earliest days. As Octavio observed him, a proud smile spread across his face, his thoughts drifting to his late daughter, Emiliano's mother, whose memory was a bittersweet reminder of love and loss that had left a deep void. During their modest afternoon meal of tortillas and beans, Octavio's voice trembled with emotion as he reminisced about Emiliano's mother. "She had your smile, and that same fierce determination," he said, his eyes misty with tears as he recounted treasured memories. Emiliano listened intently, every word painting a vivid portrait of a mother he would only come to know through these heartfelt tales. The absence of Emiliano's father, Salvador, loomed like a shadow over their home. Octavio endeavored to bridge this chasm with abundant affection and care, yet he was acutely aware of its inadequacy. "Your father does care for you, Emiliano, even if his way of showing it seems misguided," Octavio gently explained, striving to cushion the painful reality of Salvador's indifference. Emiliano's gaze was distant, his thoughts lingering on a father who made rare appearances, his gifts often feeling like mere tokens of obligation rather than genuine expressions of love. As nightfall embraced the house and Emiliano lay in bed amidst the wooden toys he had crafted with his own hands, his mind wandered over the day's experiences. He reflected on the precious moments spent with his grandfather, the cherished stories of his mother, and the distant, elusive father, who seemed more like a character from a distant story than a tangible part of his life. He dreamt of a future where he could finally demonstrate to his father all that he had learned and perhaps experience the longed-for embrace he so desperately craved. The following day, Octavio, his once dark hair now a distinguished silver, moved with a slow and deliberate grace around the workshop. His eyes, though weary, still sparkled with the enduring warmth of his affection for Emiliano. "You're truly blossoming into a skilled carpenter, Emiliano. It's time for you to tackle more ambitious projects," he remarked with a tender, albeit fatigued, smile. Emiliano, noticing the strain etched into his grandfather's face, gently insisted that he take a break. "Let me handle the workshop for a while, Grandpa. You've given so much already," Emiliano urged, deeply concerned about his grandfather's declining health. Their neighbor Dona Lupe, a hearty woman with a constantly beaming smile, had become an unwavering pillar of support in their lives. Each day she would knock on their door, arriving with generous portions of mole and enchiladas, her way of ensuring that Octavio and Emiliano were nourished and cared for. "Octavio, you must eat properly to keep that persistent cough at bay," she would chide affectionately, her tone a blend of maternal concern and loving reprimand. Emiliano, witnessing her constant kindness, felt a profound sense of gratitude for her relentless care. In exchange for her culinary generosity, Emiliano often assisted Dona Lupe in her garden. "You need to learn how to cook, Emiliano. You can't subsist on tortillas and beans alone," she would instruct, imparting the secrets of traditional recipes with a mix of sternness and kindness. These moments in her kitchen provided Emiliano with more than just cooking skills. They offered him a fleeting taste of what it might be like to have a mother. Dona Lupe's stories about the city, her wise advice, and her attentive ear became a comforting presence in his life, helping him navigate his young age's uncertainties and dreams. Whenever Octavio had to visit the doctor or run errands to the pharmacy, Dona Lupe would graciously stay with Emiliano. "Rest assured, Octavio, I'll look after Emiliano as if he were my flesh and blood," she would promise with heartfelt sincerity. Though Emiliano missed his grandfather dearly during these times, he found solace in Dona Lupe's company. They would engage in card games, listen to the radio, and converse about everything and nothing, creating a bond that filled the spaces left by his grandfather's absence. One evening, after Octavio returned from a particularly exhausting doctor visit, he appeared especially frail. Settling into his old armchair, he fixed Emiliano with a grave gaze. "Emiliano, I'm not well," the doctor said. He began. But Emiliano, sensing the gravity of the situation, interrupted with a trembling voice. "Don't say anything more, Grandpa. I understand. All I want is for you to rest and regain your strength," Emiliano responded, his eyes brimming with unshed tears as he enveloped his grandfather in a heartfelt embrace. In the days that followed, Mr. Octavio's health continued to deteriorate, forcing him into the confines of a hospital bed. During this difficult time, Dona Lupe's presence became even more indispensable. She took on the role of caretaker with a quiet resolve, tending to Emiliano's needs, preparing meals, and assisting him with his schoolwork. One somber Sunday morning, Dona Lupe received the call she had been dreading. The hospital in Guanajuato, speaking with a voice soft and sorrowful, delivered the devastating news Octavio had passed away. A wave of anguish washed over Dona Lupe as she prepared to deliver this heartbreaking news to Emiliano. Her normally bright and welcoming face was clouded with an unusual solemnity as she made her way to the house next door. Each step felt heavier than the last, burdened by the weight of the sorrow she was about to inflict. When she found Emiliano in the workshop, his hands busy with wooden tools, she took a deep breath, her heart aching for the boy who had come to mean so much to her. "Emiliano, my dear," Dona Lupe began, her voice trembling with barely contained grief, "I have some very sad news to share." Her words hung heavily in the air, like an unbearable weight. "Your grandfather, he has left us." The impact of her words was immediate and brutal. Emiliano's eyes welled up with tears as the harsh reality of the loss struck him like a physical blow. Dona Lupe reached out and enveloped him in a tight embrace, offering what little comfort she could amid such profound sorrow. She continued, attempting to soften the blow with a sliver of hope. "Your father called," she said gently. "He's coming to take you to live with him. Until then, I will care for you as if you were my own." Overwhelmed by his grief and confusion, Emiliano could only nod in response, finding some solace in her warm embrace and comforting words. Later, Emiliano sat on the floor of his room, the open suitcase before him an emblem of the transition he was about to face. Each item he folded and packed felt like sealing away a cherished chapter of his life. The wooden toy he and his grandfather had crafted together was the first to go into the suitcase, followed by the set of carpentry tools Octavio had gifted him. Though the sadness that enveloped him was profound, the prospect of moving in with his father offered a glimmer of hope. Maybe it won't be so bad, he mused quietly, trying to find some measure of reassurance that this new chapter might ease the aching void left by his grandfather's passing. The sudden chime of the doorbell shattered the heavy silence that had settled over the house. When Emiliano opened the door, he was met by his father, Salvador, whose face was etched with a sorrowful smile. "Emiliano, my son," Salvador said, his arms stretching out in a tentative embrace. The hug felt awkward and unfamiliar, but Emiliano accepted it, finding a small measure of comfort in the warmth of his father's presence. "I'm deeply sorry for your loss. Your grandfather was truly an extraordinary man," Salvador said, his gaze drifting around the home, now a poignant tableau of memories tied to Octavio. In the living room, Salvador sat beside Emiliano, his voice laden with an attempt at consolation. "You've grown so much since we last saw each other," he said, a mixture of pride and regret in his eyes as he looked at his son. "From this point forward, I'll be here to take care of you. We'll embark on a new chapter of our lives together." Emiliano nodded, though his father's words seemed to echo distantly as he grappled with the enormity of the changes unfolding before him. Salvador assisted Emiliano with the final packing of his belongings, the air thick with unspoken emotions. Spotting the carpentry tools among Emiliano's packed items, Salvador asked, "Are you planning to bring these with you?" Emiliano gazed at the tools, each one a treasured relic of the afternoon spent in the workshop with his grandfather. "Yes, they're incredibly important to me. They belong to my grandfather," Emiliano replied, his voice steady despite the sadness that lingered. Salvador nodded in understanding, recognizing the profound significance these tools held for his son. With a heavy heart, Emiliano bid farewell to Dona Lupe, tears welling up in his eyes. She leaned in, her voice a gentle whisper of reassurance. "I'll always be here for you, Emiliano. Now go forth and embrace your new life. Cherish every moment." As they drove towards their new home, Salvador made an effort to bridge the uncomfortable silence with light conversation. He spoke about Emiliano's new school and the neighborhood they would soon call home, striving to fill the void left by the absence of Octavio. Emiliano listened passively, responding when necessary, but his thoughts were consumed with memories of his grandfather and the familiar life he was leaving behind. Salvador cast a sideways glance at Emiliano, his face betraying a mix of apprehension and resolve. "Emiliano, there's something important I need to talk to you about," he began, his voice carrying a note of hesitation that made Emiliano's heart skip a beat. "I want to introduce you to Elena, my wife. We've been married for almost 3 years now." Emiliano's eyes widened slightly with surprise. The idea of having a stepmother was entirely new to him. Salvador continued, his tone softening. "Elena was a lawyer before we got married. She's a remarkably intelligent and compassionate woman, and I think you'll like her." The drive to the new house felt longer than usual, as Emiliano's mind was awash with thoughts of what his new family might be like. When they finally arrived, Salvador led Emiliano up the path to the front door. The house was charming, its exterior a blend of warm colors that seemed inviting. As they approached, the door swung open to reveal Elena standing there with a genuine, welcoming smile that seemed to light up the entryway. "You must be Emiliano," Elena said, her voice full of warmth and kindness. She extended her hand in a gesture of friendly introduction. "I'm Elena. It's such a pleasure to finally meet you." Emiliano, feeling a mix of shyness and curiosity, shook her hand. "Hello, nice to meet you too," he replied, his voice a bit hesitant but sincere. Elena's smile and the kindness in her eyes helped to ease his nervousness, offering a glimmer of comfort in this new chapter of his life. Elena then gently guided Emiliano inside, where they were greeted by the lively sounds of a bustling household. She introduced him to her son, Lucas, who was nearly the same age as Emiliano. Lucas stood tall with a broad, friendly smile that radiated warmth. "Hey, Emiliano, "It's great to have someone my age here. I'm sure we're going to get along well," Lucas said, extending his hand for a handshake and giving Emiliano a friendly, reassuring pat on the shoulder. The genuine enthusiasm in Lucas's voice and his easygoing manner provided Emiliano with a small but significant sense of belonging. As Emiliano settled into his new home, he couldn't help but notice the thoughtful touches Alina had added to the house to make it feel more like a home. The walls were adorned with family photos in warm, welcoming colors. The living room had a cozy feel, with comfortable furniture and a few of Lucas's personal touches that hinted at his interests and personality. Elena showed Emiliano to his new room, which was bright and airy, with a window that overlooked a small garden. "I hope you'll find this space comfortable," Elena said with a reassuring smile. Emiliano nodded, feeling a mix of apprehension and hope. The room felt different from the one he had left behind, but the effort Elena had put into making it inviting was not lost on him. Throughout the day, as Salvador and Elena busied themselves with unpacking and setting up the house, Emiliano spent time getting acquainted with Lucas and exploring his new surroundings. The initial discomfort of moving to a new home was tempered by the warmth and friendliness of his new family. Though the transition was daunting, the kindness and effort of his father and stepmother, along with the friendly demeanor of Lucas, began to offer Emiliano a sense of reassurance that perhaps this new chapter could hold moments of joy and belonging after all. Emiliano couldn't shake the growing sense of irritation that gnawed at him. Emiliano won't have the easy life he's expecting here, Elena thought, her gaze cold and calculating as she observed him. Despite recognizing Emiliano's efforts, she harbored no sympathy, only a relentless resolve to impose her rigid standards on the household. Her approach was clinical and unyielding, focused solely on maintaining order according to her vision of what the home should be. Meanwhile, Lucas, with his easygoing demeanor, went about his mornings without a trace of hurry. He prepared for school in a leisurely fashion, a stark contrast to Emiliano's grueling efforts in the garden. This disparity in treatment became increasingly glaring, casting Emiliano in the shadow of neglect and injustice. As the days wore on, Emiliano's isolation grew more palpable. He found himself eating his meals alone in the kitchen, separated from the family's dining rituals. Elena's demeanor hardened, her expectations and demands of Emiliano growing more severe, while Lucas continued to enjoy a more lenient and affectionate treatment. Emiliano struggled to reconcile the mounting sense of estrangement he felt. His attempts to maintain his composure were growing increasingly strained. One evening, feeling overwhelmed and yearning for a sense of normalcy, Emiliano sought to call his father. However, Elena's reaction was swift and harsh. "Don't be selfish, Emiliano," she chided, her voice laced with sternness. "Your father is working hard. Do you want him to be angry with you for interrupting him?" Her words were a sharp, psychological push that made Emiliano feel guilty for even thinking about seeking support from his father. "I don't want to be a problem," Emiliano thought to himself, his heart weighed down by the oppressive guilt of being perceived as a burden. The atmosphere at home continued to deteriorate, leaving Emiliano feeling increasingly isolated and trapped. However, the dynamics shifted dramatically upon Salvador's return from his business trip. The moment Salvador walked through the door, Elena's demeanor underwent a striking transformation. Gone was the cold, demanding stepmother. Instead, she greeted Salvador with a radiant smile and an affectionate embrace. "Salvador, dear, how was your trip?" Elena asked, her voice warm and sincere, her eyes sparkling with genuine delight as she enveloped her husband in a hug. Emiliano, observing the sudden shift in Elena's behavior, felt a pang of disbelief. He chose to remain silent, recognizing his father's visible joy at being home. During dinner, Salvador animatedly recounted tales from his trip, his voice filled with excitement and enthusiasm. Elena hung on his every word, laughing and chiming in with appropriate comments, her previous rigidity replaced by the warmth and attentiveness Emiliano had seen at their initial meeting. Emiliano engaged in the dinner conversation, trying to fit into the family's newly harmonious atmosphere, but his gaze remained distant and contemplative. Salvador, noticing his son's subdued demeanor, reached out with genuine concern. "Everything okay at school, Emiliano?" he asked, his tone laced with care. Emiliano forced a smile, masking the turmoil within, and replied, "Yes, Dad, everything's fine. Despite his efforts to appear content, Emiliano's mind remained occupied with the complexities of his new life, the stark contrasts in treatment, and the emotional weight of feeling like an outsider in his own home. In the days that followed, Emiliano's daily routine lightened significantly. Elena, having previously imposed a stringent regime, seemed to have eased her demands. The extra chores that had once burdened Emiliano were no longer part of his schedule. Elena even offered to assist him, but when Emiliano offered to help, she gently declined, saying, "No, Emiliano, you've done enough. Go rest or spend time with Lucas." Her tone was soft and nurturing, a stark contrast to the rigid, demanding manner she had used when Salvador was away. Emiliano felt a wave of relief wash over him at the prospect of being free from Elena's earlier harshness. Yet this relief was tinged with confusion. The sudden shift in Elena's behavior left Emiliano grappling with mixed emotions. He was grateful for the reprieve but couldn't shake the feeling of distrust that had taken root. Her abrupt change in demeanor made him question her motives and intentions, filling him with a deep sense of sadness and uncertainty. In an attempt to find solace, Emiliano retreated to his grandfather's old workshop. There, amidst the familiar scents of wood and linseed oil, he threw himself into carpentry projects, seeking refuge in the craftsmanship that had once brought him joy. The workshop became his sanctuary, a place where the memories of his grandfather, Octavio, provided comfort and a sense of continuity. One night, as Emiliano lay in bed, his mind was consumed by a troubling thought. He wrestled with the idea of confiding in his father about Elena's behavior during Salvador's absence. Will my father believe me? What if this causes problems between them? He pondered anxiously. The notion of stirring conflict between his parents terrified him, yet the injustice he had experienced left a heavy burden on his heart. The decision weighed heavily on him, caught between his fear of familial discord and his need to be heard. The next day, Emiliano found himself assisting Salvador with a minor repair around the house. As they worked side by side, Emiliano's internal struggle reached a boiling point. He knew this was the moment to speak up. "Dad, I need to tell you something," he began, his voice tentative. Salvador paused, setting aside his tools and giving Emiliano his full attention. "What's wrong, Emiliano? You can tell me anything," Salvador encouraged, his voice filled with concern. Emiliano took a deep breath, his heart racing as he met his father's gaze. "So, Dad, I need to tell you about how things were while you were away," he began, his voice quivering with emotion. Elena changed completely. She became very strict and made me handle all the chores around the house, while Lucas didn't have to do anything. Emiliano's words were a torrent of truth, each syllable laden with the pain of his experiences. Salvador's expression shifted to one of surprise and concern. He frowned, struggling to process his son's revelation. "Son, are you certain about what you're saying?" "Elena is a wonderful person," Salvador replied, his voice a mix of confusion and disbelief. Emiliano's heart sank at his father's reaction, the support he had hoped for seeming to waver. The conversation had begun, but the path ahead felt uncertain. He yearned for understanding and validation, but was met with skepticism that only deepened his sense of isolation. Salvador's response left Emiliano feeling even more disheartened. "I've seen Elena taking care of Lucas all these years, and she's never acted like this," Salvador said, his skepticism evident. "This situation is new for you, and you might be feeling out of place. Maybe you're interpreting things differently." Emiliano's frustration surged. "No, Dad, that's not it. I know what I've experienced. She was completely different before you came back, cold and demanding," he insisted, his voice tinged with sadness. The contrast between Salvador's perception and Emiliano's reality felt like a chasm that couldn't be bridged. Salvador tried to comfort his son, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Emiliano, I understand you want attention and validation, and that's natural. But I think you might be exaggerating. Elena has always been good to Lucas and will be to you as well," he said, trying to offer solace despite his evident doubt. Emiliano felt crushed by his father's reaction. He had hoped for understanding, but instead, he found skepticism that only deepened his sense of isolation. "Okay, Dad, maybe I'm just seeing things differently," he said, attempting to mask his disappointment with a forced smile. Deep inside, he knew his experiences were valid, but he realized convincing his father would be nearly impossible. In the days that followed, Emiliano chose to hold back his concerns. He saw that Salvador genuinely didn't grasp the full scope of Elena's behavior and decided it would be best to keep his observations to himself. The decision to remain silent weighed heavily on him, but he felt it was the only way to avoid further conflict. The experience left him feeling more isolated and alone in a house he struggled to see as his home. When Salvador left for work each day, the atmosphere in the house shifted dramatically. Elena became even stricter and more authoritarian with Emiliano. The warmth and leniency she had shown during Salvador's presence vanished, replaced by a rigid, demanding demeanor. Emiliano's chores increased, and he felt the weight of her expectations even more acutely. Meals were once again served separately, and the kindness he had briefly experienced seemed like a distant memory. Elena's behavior became a daily reminder of his precarious position within the household. Emiliano, isolated and without the support he had hoped for, found solace only in the memories of his grandfather and the few moments of peace he could carve out for himself. He focused on his carpentry projects, clinging to the comfort they provided while grappling with the harsh reality of his new life. The house, once a potential refuge, now felt like a place where he was constantly on edge, trying to navigate a world where he felt increasingly out of place. On the first day, Elena approached Emiliano with a list of tasks. "Emiliano, here's your to-do list for today," she said, handing him a piece of paper. "You need to clean the house, wash the dishes, and tend to the garden. And no work in your workshop today. You have a lot of work to do here." The list was detailed and overwhelming, and Emiliano's heart sank as he took it in. "But Elena, I need time for my projects," Emiliano protested, trying to make his case. However, Elena cut him off sharply. "I don't want to hear excuses. You're under my roof, so you'll follow my rules," she said, her tone leaving no room for debate. Emiliano's pleas were met with silence, and he was left to face the daunting list of chores that seemed to grow longer with each passing day. Lucas, who had once seemed like a brother to Emiliano, began to change as well. The camaraderie they had shared started to erode. Lucas would pass by Emiliano without acknowledging him, his once friendly demeanor replaced by indifference. One evening, Emiliano mustered up the courage to reach out. "Lucas, do you want to play video games after dinner?" he asked, hoping for some connection. Lucas, without looking up from his phone, replied coldly, "No, I'm busy. Besides, I prefer to play alone." The dismissive tone pierced Emiliano's heart, and he realized that the only friend he thought he had in this house was slipping away. As days turned into weeks, Emiliano's sense of isolation grew. The chores took up most of his time, leaving him little room for his woodworking projects or personal interests. He frequently found himself lost in memories of his grandfather, Don Lupe, and the life he had before. These memories were bittersweet, offering comfort but also deepening his sense of loss. "If only I could talk to Don Lupe," Emiliano thought wistfully. But the house phone had been disconnected, and Elena kept the cell phone under lock and key. "I don't want you to be distracted by unnecessary calls," she had justified, blocking Emiliano's access to the outside world and leaving him cut off from the support he so desperately needed. One night, as Emiliano lay in bed staring at the ceiling, he grappled with his emotions. "I'd like to talk to my father and make him understand what's happening," he murmured to himself. Yet, he knew that any attempt to reach out would likely be thwarted by Elena's control. The prospect of his father not believing him only added to his frustration and sense of helplessness. Elena's increasingly authoritarian demeanor left Emiliano feeling more isolated than ever. The house, which he had hoped would be a place of comfort and new beginnings, now felt like a prison where his efforts were met with disdain and his friendships were crumbling. Every day he struggled to maintain a semblance of hope while navigating a world that seemed increasingly hostile and unwelcoming. Emiliano felt trapped in a reality from which he couldn't escape, weighed down by loneliness and sadness. Each day he spent long hours in his room, staring out the window, desperately wishing for a way to change his situation. "I just wish someone would understand me," he thought, tears welling in his eyes, feeling completely abandoned in a house that was becoming increasingly unwelcoming. One quiet night, As the house was enveloped in a deep silence, Emiliano lay in bed unable to sleep. He heard a muffled conversation coming from Elena's room. Driven by curiosity and a sense of unease, he quietly crept towards the door to listen in. Elena's voice, low and urgent, carried through the thin walls. "Stefano, can you come here tomorrow? We need to resolve some things," she said, her tone filled with a sense of urgency that made Emiliano's curiosity spike. Confused and intrigued by the mention of someone named Stefano, a name he had never heard before, Emiliano decided to keep a close watch. The following day, he remained vigilant, eager to uncover the identity of this mysterious visitor. As the day wore on, he heard the distant sound of a car approaching. With a mix of excitement and apprehension, Emiliano slipped outside and hid behind a bush in the bush, and he could observe the front door without being seen. His heart raced as he saw a car pull up to the house. An unfamiliar man stepped out and was greeted warmly by Elena at the front door. The man appeared to be in his mid-40s, with a professional demeanor and a confident stride. Emiliano's mind raced with questions. Who was Stefano? And why was he so important to Elena? The warmth in Elena's greeting contrasted sharply with her coldness towards Emiliano, deepening his sense of isolation. Emiliano remained hidden, watching as Elena and Stefano exchanged a few words before entering the house. The nature of their conversation was unclear, but the secrecy in Elena's sudden change in demeanor made Emiliano feel even more like an outsider. He could only guess at what was happening behind those closed doors, and the sense of unease gnawed at him. After Stefano left, Emiliano was left alone with his thoughts. The brief glimpse into Elena's secretive side only added to his sense of confusion and alienation. As night fell and the house settled into its usual silence, Emiliano lay awake, pondering what he had witnessed. What does this mean for me, he wondered, feeling more isolated than ever in a house that seemed to grow colder with each passing day. Emiliano crouched behind the bush, his heart pounding as he strained to hear the conversation between Elena and Stefano. The sun had begun to set, casting long shadows over the patio, and the quiet of the evening made the voices more distinct. Stefano spoke with a sense of urgency, clearly frustrated. "Elena, we've been postponing this for too long," Stefano said, his voice edged with impatience. "When are you going to resolve the matter of your husband's money?" His gaze darted around nervously, as though he feared being overheard. Elena's response was calm but laced with tension. "I'm working on it, Stefano. But there's an obstacle I didn't expect, a nosy brat who's ruining my plans," she said, her voice carrying a note of irritation. Emiliano's heart sank as he realized she was referring to him. He felt a cold shiver run down his spine. Elena's words made it clear that he was standing in the way of whatever scheme she was hatching. Stefano's frown deepened as he pressed for more details. "And what are you going to do about it?" he asked, his tone demanding answers. Elena sighed, a sound filled with resignation and determination. "I'm organizing everything. Soon, he won't be a problem anymore. I just need a little more time." The way she spoke left Emiliano with a chilling sense of foreboding. Elena was not just planning something, she was plotting against his father, and he was the unwitting obstacle. Emiliano's mind raced, struggling to grasp the full extent of what he had overheard. How can she do this? And what exactly is she planning? He thought, feeling the weight of dread settle heavily in his chest. He felt trapped and powerless, knowing that he had to warn his father but feeling completely unable to act due to Elena's control over their means of communication. As Stefano left, Emiliano remained hidden, his mind spinning with the implications of what he had heard. He knew that he had to find a way to alert Salvador about Elena's plans, but how could he do that with Elena controlling all communication? The thought of Elena potentially putting his father at risk filled him with a profound sense of urgency. With the evening growing darker, Emiliano resolved to find a way to get his message to Salvador. The fear of what might happen if he didn't act soon drove him to think creatively about how he could overcome Elena's control. "I have to find a way to warn Dad before it's too late," Emiliano thought, the weight of responsibility pressing heavily on his young shoulders. The innocence of Emiliano's childhood seemed like a distant memory as he faced a far darker and more perilous reality. Determined to act, he spent the night in his carpentry workshop, crafting a meticulous plan to communicate with his father. His sense of urgency was palpable. Any misstep could jeopardize his chances of warning Salvador in time. Elena's daily routine was predictable, and Emiliano had observed that she took a long bath every day at precisely 2 in the afternoon. He decided that this would be the ideal opportunity to act undetected. The next day, Emiliano kept a close watch on the clock, feeling a mix of anxiety and determination as the hour approached. When the moment finally came, Emiliano sprang into action. As soon as Elena entered the bathroom, he raced to her room, where he quickly grabbed her cell phone. His heart pounded in his chest as he hurried to the workshop, a sanctuary where he could speak in relative privacy. Every second felt critical. Once in the workshop, Emiliano's hands shook as he scrolled through Elena's contacts and located his father's number, saved under the name Love. He dialed the number, praying that he wouldn't be caught and that his father would answer. The phone rang only a few times before Salvador's voice came through the receiver. "Hello." Salvador's tone was a mix of surprise and concern. "Dad, it's me, Emiliano," he said, his voice trembling with a mix of fear and urgency. "I need to tell you something very important and serious about what's happening here." There was a tense pause on the other end of the line. "Emiliano, what's happened? Are you okay?" Salvador's voice was filled with concern and confusion, clearly troubled by the unexpected call and not hearing Elena's voice. "Dad, you have to listen to me," Emiliano began, trying to steady his voice despite his rising anxiety. "Ever since you went on your trip, things here have changed. Elena isn't who we thought she was. When you're not here, she turns into someone completely different. She's been harsh with me, making me do all the housework and forbidding me from using the workshop." Salvador's silence on the other end was heavy, filled with the weight of disbelief and concern. Emiliano continued, trying to convey the gravity of his situation. "And Lucas, he's changed too. He used to be friendly, but now he barely speaks to me. Elena has disconnected the house phone, so I can't call anyone else for help." The urgency in Salvador's voice was palpable. "Emiliano, are you sure about all this? It sounds unbelievable. Elena has always been so kind and caring. Why would she act like this?" "I'm sure," Dad Emiliano insisted, his voice breaking slightly. "I've seen and heard things I shouldn't have. Elena was talking to someone named Stefano. They were discussing your money and how I'm an obstacle in their plans. I don't know what exactly they're planning, but I know it's not good." There was a moment of stunned silence from Salvador, followed by a deep sigh. "I wish I had been more aware of what was happening," Salvador said, his voice heavy with regret. "I'll find a way to investigate this further. Thank you for letting me know, Emiliano. I'm going to take immediate action." Emiliano felt a wave of relief wash over him, mixed with lingering anxiety. "Dad, please be careful. I don't know what Elena and Stefano might do." "I will," son Salvador assured him. "Just stay safe and keep your distance from Elena as much as you can. I'll be in touch soon." As the call ended, Emiliano returned the phone to its place and made his way back to his room, his heart still racing but now with a glimmer of hope. He knew that his father would take action, but the uncertainty of the situation and the fear of what might come next weighed heavily on him. He could only hope that Salvador would act swiftly and effectively to protect them all from the dangers that Elena and Stefano posed. Emiliano's words came tumbling out in a rush, filled with a mix of desperation and conviction. "Dad, Lucas has changed too. He used to be like a brother to me, but now he's completely ignoring me. I've been isolated and mistreated while Elena takes every opportunity to belittle and control me." Salvador's response was one of shock and concern, laced with disbelief. "Emiliano, this is very serious. Are you sure about this? Elena has always been good to us, especially to you." "I know how it sounds, but it's the truth," Emiliano pressed on, trying to make his father understand the gravity of the situation. "Last night, I overheard Elena talking to someone named Stefano. They were discussing a money issue, and Elena mentioned that I was an obstacle to her plans." The weight of Emiliano's words seemed to sink in slowly. Salvador's voice was laden with concern. "This is very serious, Emiliano. I need to process this and figure out what's going on." Keep acting normal until I return. I'll be there in 2 days and we'll sort this out. Don't mention this to anyone else, okay? I need to gather all the facts first." After the call ended, Emiliano felt a bittersweet mix of relief and anxiety. He had managed to alert his father, but the challenge now was to continue maintaining a facade of normalcy in a situation that felt anything but ordinary. Salvador, meanwhile, was left in stunned silence in his hotel room. Emiliano's revelation had shaken him deeply. That Stefano, Elena's ex-husband, Lucas's father, Salvador muttered to himself, trying to piece together the unsettling puzzle. The familiarity of the name suddenly took on a more ominous tone. Salvador's mind raced as he began to reconsider everything he had taken for granted. His trust in Elena was unshakable, but now he felt blindsided. The house, which he had put in Elena's name as a sign of his love and trust, seemed to carry a new and troubling significance. How could I have been so blind, he wondered, feeling a profound sense of anger and despair. Determined to uncover the truth, Salvador resolved to check his bank accounts, a task he rarely undertook, because he had always believed that everything they had was shared equally. As he logged into his accounts, his heart pounded with a mix of dread and urgency. He needed to understand whether Emiliano's claims had any basis in reality or if there was something else at play. Salvador's sense of betrayal grew as he confronted the possibility that his trust might have been exploited in ways he had never imagined. As Salvador reviewed the online statements, he was overwhelmed by a sense of betrayal. The account showed numerous large transfers to Elena's account over the years, amounts far exceeding typical household expenses. "I never noticed this before. I always thought we were building something together," Salvador said, his voice trembling with a mix of disbelief and hurt. The more Salvador examined the details, the clearer it became that Elena had been moving significant sums of money. "This doesn't make sense. Why would Elena need so much money?" he wondered, his initial confusion turning into suspicion and fear. The realization that he might have been deceived and exploited was both alarming and deeply painful. Determined to address the situation appropriately, Salvador decided to consult his lawyer. "I'm facing a very complicated situation. I need your guidance," he explained, his tone urgent and anxious. "Salvador, if what you're telling me is true, we need concrete evidence to make accusations and to revoke the assets you transferred to Elena," the lawyer responded in a serious, professional tone. "Start by documenting everything you've discovered. We need to build a solid case." With the gravity of the situation sinking in, Salvador began to carefully plan his return home. He needed to act with discretion to avoid arousing Elena's suspicion. He decided to call her, carefully controlling his tone and choosing his words to sound casual. "Hi, love. I just found out I'll have an unexpected work issue," Salvador said, keeping his voice calm and controlled. "I'll be able to come back tomorrow, but I'll only be able to stay for 2 days. I hope that's okay with you." On the other end of the line, Elena's response was laced with a subtle relief she struggled to conceal. "Oh, Salvador, what a shame. I was looking forward to your return, but I understand. Work comes first. I'll be waiting for you," she said, her voice reflecting a sadness that seemed only partially genuine. As Salvador hung up the phone, he felt a cold determination settling in. He needed to uncover the full extent of Elena's actions and protect his interests while ensuring Emiliano's safety. He carefully prepared for his return, knowing that every move he made from now on would need to be strategic and well thought out to navigate the complex and painful situation that had unfolded. Elena's malicious smile lingered as she hung up, believing her plans were safely on track. Her sense of triumph was palpable as she prepared to execute her schemes without fear of interference. Little did she know that Salvador, though emotionally torn, was already putting a plan into action to expose her deceit. As Salvador drove home, he was consumed by a whirlwind of emotions. Worry for Emiliano and a profound sense of betrayal weighed heavily on him. "I need to stay calm and figure out how I can get proof of what Emiliano said," he thought, steeling himself for the task ahead. The coming days would be crucial in uncovering the truth about Elena. Arriving at an electronics store en route, Salvador purchased a discreet hidden camera. He chose a model designed to be inconspicuous, intending to capture any suspicious behavior without arousing Elena's suspicion. As he held the small device, he felt a renewed sense of purpose, knowing that every detail mattered in his mission to expose the truth. When Salvador finally returned home, Emiliano greeted him with a hopeful glimmer in his eyes. Seeing his son's hopeful expression, Salvador gave him a subtle, reassuring wink. It was a silent communication, signaling Emiliano to continue acting normally while he carried out his plan. Emiliano, perceptive and intuitive, understood the message immediately, even without knowing the specifics of his father's strategy. That night, as darkness enveloped the house, Salvador moved with precision and caution. He chose a spot in the living room where the camera could capture a broad view of the space, yet remain hidden from sight. Every motion was deliberate, and every placement was calculated to ensure the camera's effectiveness while keeping it undetectable. Salvador's hands trembled slightly as he worked, but he maintained focus, knowing that the success of his plan depended on these small, crucial details. Having completed the installation, Salvador felt a sense of grim satisfaction. He knew that the camera would be his eyes and ears while he was away, providing the evidence needed to confront Elena with undeniable proof. For now, he could only hope that the camera would capture the truth and that his actions would bring the resolution Emiliano and he so desperately needed. With the camera set up, Salvador and Emiliano settled into their routine, both acutely aware of the tension and stakes. Salvador's heart was heavy with the weight of what lay ahead, but he remained resolute, committed to uncovering the truth and protecting his family. As Salvador watched the live feed, the gravity of the situation hit him hard. Each frame revealed the harsh reality Emiliano had been living under Elena's rule. The sight of his son, overwhelmed by an unrelenting list of chores and enduring Elena's harsh commands, was a sharp reminder of the pain Emiliano had described. Salvador's heart ached with guilt and anger. He felt a profound sense of betrayal not only from Elena, but also from his oversight. Salvador's frustration mounted as he saw Emiliano's silent compliance. His son, who had always been eager and lively, was now a subdued figure, weighed down by an unjust burden. How could I have missed this? Salvador thought bitterly, grappling with a wave of guilt for not recognizing the signs sooner. Despite his impulse to return home and confront Elena directly, Salvador remembered the lawyer's advice about needing concrete evidence. "I need to remain patient," he reminded himself, forcing himself to stay composed. His focus shifted back to the screen as he waited for further evidence that could solidify his case. As days passed, Salvador continued to monitor the recordings closely. He noted Elena's continued harshness towards Emiliano and her evasive conversations with Stefano. Salvador collected footage of their discussions, which further confirmed Emiliano's account. Elena's behavior and the financial transactions were becoming increasingly clear, painting a picture of deceit and manipulation. Salvador used this time to compile detailed notes and evidence, preparing for the moment when he would confront Elena with undeniable proof. He coordinated with his lawyer, sharing the recordings and discussing the best course of action. The lawyer advised him to be meticulous and thorough, ensuring that every piece of evidence was documented and legally sound. Throughout this period, Salvador maintained his composure, balancing the emotional turmoil with the necessity of a strategic approach. He knew that rushing into confrontation without solid evidence could backfire and potentially jeopardize Emiliano's situation. Finally, after gathering sufficient proof, Salvador felt ready to take action. He planned a meeting with Elena where he would present the evidence and address the situation head-on. The moment of confrontation was approaching, and Salvador hoped that the truth would finally come to light, bringing justice for Emiliano and resolving the tangled web of deceit. As Salvador prepared for the pivotal meeting, he kept in mind the promise he had made to Emiliano. You'll understand later. It was a promise not just of action, but of resolution, aimed at restoring trust and securing Emiliano's well-being. Salvador's plan was set in motion. With the evidence firmly in hand and Emiliano's safety in the hands of Dona Lupe, he prepared for his confrontation with Elena. He knew the situation was critical and needed to be handled with care. Salvador resolved to return home, determined to face Elena and bring the truth to light. As he drove back to his house, Salvador's mind was a tumult of thoughts. He considered the next steps, confronting Elena with the evidence, ensuring Emiliano's protection, and dealing with the legal repercussions. The weight of the betrayal and the gravity of the situation felt heavy on his shoulders. Upon arriving home, Salvador found the house eerily quiet. He took a moment to steel himself before entering. Elena was at the kitchen table, appearing calm and collected as usual. Salvador's resolve hardened as he prepared to confront her with the undeniable truth. "Elena," Salvador said, his voice steady but filled with the intensity of his emotions. Elena looked up, her face momentarily betraying a hint of surprise. "We need to talk. I've seen everything." Elena's expression shifted from surprise to guarded calm. "What are you talking about, Salvador?" she asked, trying to maintain her composure. Salvador didn't waste any time. He pulled out his phone and began playing the recordings. The footage of Elena and Stefano discussing their plans, her calculated betrayal, and the financial manipulations filled the room. Elena's face turned pale as she realized the extent of Salvador's knowledge. How did you get this?" Elena stammered, her facade crumbling. "I have proof of everything," Salvador said firmly, his voice echoing with a mixture of anger and resolve. "I've seen your true intentions, Elena. I know about the money, the plans with Stefano, and how you've manipulated me and treated Emiliano." Elena's defiant stance faltered, and she looked around the room, seemingly searching for an escape route. "Salvador, please, listen." "No." Elena Salvador interrupted, his voice cold and decisive. "There's nothing left to discuss. I've already contacted my lawyer, and legal action will be taken. Emiliano is safe with Donna Lupe, and he'll be coming home with me soon." Elena's attempts to justify her actions were met with Salvador's unwavering determination. She tried to plead and reason, but Salvador was resolute. "It's over, Elena," he said, turning away from her. With the confrontation behind him, Salvador went to Donna Lupe's house to pick up Emiliano. Seeing his father's concerned face, Emiliano's anxiety melted into relief. "Dad, is everything going to be okay?" he asked, his voice trembling. Salvador embraced Emiliano tightly. "We're going to be okay, Emiliano. I'm so sorry for everything you've been through. We'll figure things out together." The journey ahead would be challenging, but Salvador was determined to right the wrongs that had been done and ensure a safe and stable future for Emiliano. He knew that healing and rebuilding trust would take time, but the first step was confronting the betrayal and taking control of the situation. As Salvador held Emiliano in his arms, he could feel the tension and fear slowly dissipating from his son's body. Emiliano clung to his father, seeking comfort and reassurance after a day filled with uncertainty and distress. Salvador's heart ached for his son, knowing how much he had suffered due to Elena's deceit. "Donna Lupe took good care of you, didn't she?" Salvador asked, his voice gentle and soothing. Emiliano nodded, his eyes still reflecting the confusion and worry of earlier. "Yeah, she was very kind," Emiliano replied, his voice muffled against Salvador's shoulder. "But what's going to happen now? What about Elena?" Salvador sighed deeply, trying to find the right words. "Elena made some very bad choices, Emiliano. She tried to use our trust and our money for her selfish reasons. I've made sure she won't be able to hurt us or take anything from us again. We're going to start fresh, and we'll get through this together." Emiliano looked up at his father, his eyes wide with a mix of relief and lingering fear. "And what about Lucas? Is he okay?" Salvador's heart sank a little at the mention of Lucas. He had not yet spoken to Lucas about what had happened. "Lucas is safe," Salvador assured Emiliano. "I'll make sure he's taken care of too. We need to focus on getting our lives back on track and making sure you feel safe and happy." The day had been long and exhausting for Salvador. He was grateful for the support of Donna Lupe and the evidence that had exposed Elena's betrayal. Now he wanted to focus on healing and rebuilding the trust that had been shattered. "Let's go home," Emiliano Salvador said, his voice firm yet tender. "We'll get through this together. I want us to find a new place, somewhere we can be happy and start over." Emiliano nodded, a small smile breaking through the worry. "Okay, Dad. I just want us to be okay." As they left Donna Lupe's house, Salvador felt a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead was uncertain, but he was determined to protect his son and ensure their future was filled with the love and security that had been cruelly taken from them. With each step, Salvador felt the burden lifting, replaced by a glimmer of hope for a better tomorrow. Salvador felt relieved and grateful to hear Dona Lupe's words. Her kindness and generosity had provided a moment of peace in the midst of the storm. "Your support has been invaluable," Dona Lupe, Salvador said sincerely. "Knowing that Emiliano is in good hands allows me to focus on my work and securing a stable future for both of us." Dona Lupe nodded, showing her understanding. "You don't have to worry about me, Salvador. Seeing Emiliano happy and well cared for is reward enough. Besides, with everything you've done for me, I'm always here to help in any way I can." Time continued to pass, and Salvador and Emiliano found a new rhythm in their lives. The new house quickly became a home filled with laughter, peace, and new memories. Salvador focused on rebuilding his professional life and ensuring that Emiliano had every opportunity to heal and grow. Meanwhile, Emiliano adjusted to his new routine and began to open up more during his therapy sessions. Little by little, the boy regained his confidence and started showing more joy in his daily activities. The bond between father and son grew even stronger, and Salvador felt hopeful for the future. As the months passed, Salvador began to see the light at the end of the tunnel of this difficult chapter. Though the wound of Elena's betrayal would remain a scar, he had learned valuable lessons about trust, love, and the importance of protecting his family. He was determined not to repeat the mistakes of the past and to build a future where Emiliano could thrive and feel safe. Dona Lupe's unwavering support not only helped save Emiliano during the tumultuous period, but also left a profound mark on Salvador's heart. Every time he saw Emiliano smile or laugh, Salvador felt immense gratitude towards the woman who had been a beacon of hope and kindness in their darkest moments. The discovery of the truth about Elena and Stefano not only brought justice to Salvador but also provided a sense of closure and relief. The investigation revealed the extent of their crimes, which included not only financial fraud but also manipulation and deceit of numerous people. Salvador felt a mix of sadness and anger seeing how his ex-wife and her accomplice had dragged others into their web of lies. As the case progressed through the legal system, Salvador focused on ensuring that Emiliano and Dona Lupe could move forward with their lives, free from the shadows of the past. The renovation of the house not only improved the living conditions for Emiliano and Dona Lupe, but also provided them with a warmer, safer home, a place where they could build new memories and celebrate everyday life without worries. Salvador's constant support for Dona Lupe and Emiliano was crucial to their adjustment to the new reality. The housekeeper became an invaluable ally, easing the daily burdens and allowing Dona Lupe to focus on enjoying Emiliano's company and her own well-being. Salvador made sure to be present as much as possible, sharing special moments with Emiliano, from walks in the park to movie nights and family dinners. The relationship between father and son deepened as they shared these moments together. Salvador became a role model for Emiliano, teaching him the value of integrity, honesty, and unconditional love. Through honest conversations and shared experiences, Salvador helped Emiliano overcome the pain and betrayal of the past, building a relationship based on trust and mutual support. The justice served to Elena and Stefano also taught Salvador a lesson about the importance of protecting oneself and being vigilant for warning signs. While the experience was painful, it allowed him to grow and learn valuable lessons about trust and responsibility. From then on, Salvador focused on building a future full of hope and stability, not just for himself and Emiliano, but for those around them as well. In time, Emiliano fully adapted to his new life, growing with a more mature and resilient outlook. Salvador, for his part, found renewed motivation to move forward and build a life full of purpose and meaning. Together, they faced the future with determination and hope, knowing they had overcome one of the darkest chapters of their lives and were ready to embrace a new beginning full of possibilities. As we wrap up this compelling journey, we hope you found the story both gripping and enlightening. This tale of betrayal, redemption, and new beginnings has highlighted the importance of honesty, resilience, and the power of strong familial bonds. We'd love to hear from you what has stood out to you the most from this story. What is one key lesson you've learned that you plan to bring into your own life? Share your thoughts and reflections in the comments below. We genuinely value your insights. If you liked this video, please leave your comment below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more captivating stories and content. Your support means the world to us and helps us continue bringing you engaging and meaningful narratives. Thank you for watching, and we look forward to seeing you in our next video.